Hey guys, welcome to week 6, where we're going to talk about a few different rebellions before the big one, right? So a lot of people were unhappy in the colonies for different reasons, and we're going to get to the bottom of that and what was going on. And we're going to start early on in 1622. All right, so I believe we touched on this one a little bit back when we were talking about Jamestown. And you'll recall that Powhatan wanted to maintain an alliance with the Jamestown population. But after Powhatan died, his brothers, assumed the chiefdom, and they were not so keen on maintaining that alliance. So they did promote and lead revenge sort of rebellion on the colonists at Jamestown. And so they attacked over 30 English settlements, and the reason for doing this, of course, is that the settlers were stealing, they were burning down villages, they were killing the native population. So in retaliation, they went on this spree, and they did attack, again, over 30 settlements near Jamestown, so all along the James River. And in this series of attacks, 1/3 of the English colonial population there was killed. So quite successful. However, the English colonists do retaliate on this native population for a long time, and would point to this, what they called the Indian Massacre, as justification to further treat the native population horribly with more preemptive attacks like they're known to do. Okay, so this one is called the Indian Massacre. All right, moving along to another person that we've talked about, and this is 1675 to 78, and this is called Medicoms War. Also known as King Philip's War, because the English called Medicom King Philip, but we're going to use Medicom as the name for him. So you might recall the harsh treatment of the Puritans, their unfair rules in dealing with the local population. The Puritans didn't think that the native people were using the land as they should, and so therefore the Puritans had a right to it. And so this war was a retaliation on the Puritans. It was led by Medicom, and he led the Wampanoag people, who were that most local group to the Puritans, in this war. So they raided over 25 towns near Plymouth, and they started getting close to Boston. And when they did approach Boston is when things went sour for the Wampanoags. So what happened there is they started running out of supplies in 1678 at the end of this war here, and Medicom was killed. And so when Medicom is killed, the colonists start taking trophies. They butcher his body. They remove his head. They pry his jaw off his head. They send his head to Boston as a trophy, and they send his hands to Plymouth, sort of as a warning to other groups. And other body parts are on display as well of Medicom. But this was, at the time, proportionally the deadliest war in the colonies that the colonies would see. This one was the deadliest, and it would be talked about for a long time. It would sort of spark this fear of the native population near these Puritan settlements, and would certainly inspire revenge rebellions for years. So there was another raid by the Wampanoags on Dover, and that was in 1689, where 1/4 of the colonists were killed there. And these different rebellions launched by the native population always spark further war against the native people. So the English continue with their retaliation strikes and using these rebellions as justification for going out and attacking. Oh, dog's barking like usual. All right, so let's keep moving. All right, so we're going to talk about Bacon's rebellion here, and you definitely read about this in the Howard Zinn chapter, or you will read about it when you get there. So this was going on at the same time as Medicom's War, so keep that in mind. This is 1676. Medicom's War was 75 to 78. So these are happening simultaneously. So the royal governor in Virginia and Jamestown by the time was Berkeley. And William Berkeley, was a wealthy guy. He and the wealthiest of white men in this area, had this monopoly on the fur trade there. And our friend Nathaniel Bacon, you know, he was kind of newly rich, but he was not a part of this group of men that had this monopoly. So he had been angling to get in on this fur monopoly. They weren't letting him in, so he was sort of an outsider. And while this was happening, he's bitter about not getting in on the fur trade. He takes hold of this unhappy population of people on the frontier. And these people are unhappy because they feel they're not getting protection that, you know, people in the city and in the towns are getting from the native people. So they're claiming that they're being raided and they're living this dangerous life, and nobody's coming to help them. So he embodies this upset among the frontier people and asks permission to go out and raid native settlements. They deny it. So he gathers together the different frontier people. He offers freedom to servants and enslaved people. So this is one thing about this rebellion that is probably the most important part, is that he's gathering almost everybody that's mad at white men and also mad at the native population. And they launch a rebellion. They go on this spree of killing different native settlements. They eventually march on Jamestown, and they demand this permission to slaughter them. They still don't get it. They end up torching the city of Jamestown, which is depicted here in the picture. And, you know, William Berkeley and the other people in charge, these wealthy white dudes, are definitely trying to put down this rebellion. They're upset. They're going to war with these colonists. And what happens, mainly what ends this rebellion, is that Bacon dies. Nathaniel Bacon gets dysentery, sort of ends that movement, and eventually the servants and the enslaved people that were caught up in this end up being captured. They're told if they give up their arms and come back that they'll be, they won't get in any trouble, it'll be fine. Most of them end up getting executed. But this is really scary for those rich white dudes because, oh my goodness, white people, black people, and, you know, different people that are in servitude, they're all joining together, and that's a really dangerous thing. So this will probably be on an exam of some sort, you know, why it was so scary that, you know, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Why was this rebellion so scary? And it's because black people and white people were joining together, and that should not happen. So the colonies start, or the people in charge of the colonies start figuring out how do they keep these groups of people separate to maintain their own interests. And so one of the ways that ends up working for that is giving white people privileges that black people won't get. So racial code laws really take off after this. Okay, moving along. Here we have Culpeper's Rebellion, and this is in North Carolina, so between 1677 and 79, and this is a rebellion against the Navigation Acts, and I've put them over here on the right so you can be aware of what those acts are. These were first implemented by Charles II, and then they were cracked down on by William and Mary eventually. So these Navigation Acts are an example of enforcing mercantilism. So keeping the money in the nation that the colony belongs to, making sure that all the profits are going back to England, for example. So part of the rules here, making sure colonial goods are transported directly to England, and so that is going to include cash crops. So any cash crops had to be shipped directly to England. Any other goods coming out of the colonies, if they were not a cash crop, they could be sold to other nations, but they must be transported on a British vessel, and that's to make sure duties are being collected. So heavy taxes as well. A lot of people were trying to, you know, smuggle things in to get out of those taxes. So anyway, this rebellion was in response to these. The colonists and especially merchants did not like those. So we have Culpeper, and he and his associates went and imprisoned the deputy governor, and some other officials. in response to this, they didn't like it. They made their own legislature. They chose Culpeper, the guy who led this rebellion, as the new governor, and they ruled that way for 2 whole years, which is kind of shocking. But if you think back to then, news doesn't travel very quickly, right? So eventually someone came, after news came to England, and then they figured out what to do, and then they were able to send somebody back. Eventually, Culpeper was removed from his governorship that he had assumed, and he was tried for treason, but there was no punishment. Nothing happened to Culpeper. Okay, let's move along to the next one here. Great Revolt of Boston. Okay, so James II is king at this point. You'll remember him. He was king after Charles II. And James ended up being removed in the Glorious Revolution because he was deemed to be an unfit ruler. And one of the things he had done to make the colonies mad was to send in crown officials to rule different colonies. And so James II sent Edmund Andros to go rule New England. And Andros was not a liked guy. Some of the things he did, he tried to implement different Church of England policies in a Puritan territory. And as I'm sure you know, Puritans fled from the Church of England. So they were not happy about that. He also restricted town meetings, which was a big part of Puritan life. And he strictly enforced those navigation acts. So he was definitely not a popular man. So Andros immediately, I already said that, he attempted to enforce policy. Okay, so Glorious Revolution happens in 1688, and that is when James is removed, William and Mary come in, and the people of Boston are inspired by that. England just peacefully removed its ruler. And so this is a quote that they use to tell and demonstrate to William and Mary why they then went to get rid of Edmund Andros. They said, "We have been quiet hitherto, but now the Lord has prospered the undertaking of the Prince of Orange," which is William. "We think we should follow such an example. We therefore seized the vile persons who oppressed us." So they're saying, England, you guys got rid of your king. We're doing the same thing here. We're just getting rid of one of James II's corrupt ministers that he sent over. So that they imprisoned him, they held him for a year, and then shipped him back. They're like, we do not want this guy. And they sent in a letter to William and Mary with this quote, and then still pledging their support for the crown, just saying, we're getting rid of this guy. And William and Mary and Parliament were fine with it. They were like, yep, that's fine. He was corrupt. We got rid of this government, so you guys are cool. So that was fine. It worked out well. Let's see. Do we have time for the next one? Yeah, let's squeeze one more in. Wesler's Rebellion, shortly thereafter, 1689 to 91. This is sort of a copycat of the Great Revolt of Boston. Jacob Wesler, he heard about the Glorious Revolution. He heard about the Great Revolt in Boston. He wanted to do the same thing in New York. So he seized control of the colony. He made himself lieutenant governor, and he ended up doing the same thing. He pledged loyalty to William and Mary and was like, yeah, I'll be fine. Boston was fine. They didn't get in trouble, so I'm going to be fine. When William and Mary sent over officials to replace him, he refused to surrender, which was really his big problem there. Even though he supported William and Mary, he refused to, honor their decision of getting him a replacement. So he did get punished. Ultimate punishment, he was hanged for treason, 1691. All right, and we're going to pause right there, and we'll come back with a part 2.